together. No.
Getting feedback between each other?
All right, we are back. I'm not sure why I'm getting a teensy bit of feedback. I'm still trying to figure it out, but it's very minimal.
Yeah, it's very quiet and minimal.
Would you mind? Yeah, did you mind just muting? Are you muting yourself just for a second? Testing 1 2 3.
Totally muted.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3. Yeah,
testing.
I think it's coming from you, Nick. I don't know why. Oh no, wait. Are you still muted? All right, just mute. I'm gonna mute you real quick. All right, testing 1 2 3. Testing.
Testing.
I don't know why.
Live troubleshooting at its finest. Do you have a?
It's very minute, so I think we can run with it. We're gonna do the giveaway of the week. So let's do the giveaway, and then we will figure out the next
Play that fun.
And now it's time to announce this week's live technology giveaway winner. As noted in the contestant rules, all winners must be present in the chat room to claim the prize, or a new winner will be drawn. Drum roll, please.
Yay! Let's draw our winners. We've got 3 winners this
winners
week.
Today.
Everyone's winning the Chat Connect Pro app. We have George, Mark Baker, and
George.
Matt Kerner. So let me know if they are in the chat test, and we'll continue our conversation with Nick.
George is GOI11 at AOL.com because it just says George. So if you are at AOL.com, GOI11.
So Nick, let's pick up where we left off here. And I want to ask you a little bit about these NewTek Connect Sparks. We've got an SDI version. We've got an HDMI version. And I also want to talk to you about this wireless portion of it all as well. Let's jump into that.
All right. Well, I mean, you sort of spoke it as is. You got HDMI and you got SDI. Decent cost, $499 and $799 to convert any old source that meets one of those 2 specs. Each of those have a loop out, which is nice because if you want to drive them back to a local monitor so you can still see what's, whatever it's outputting, that's phenomenal. And the interesting piece that, they announced the local recording where you can plug a USB drive into it and record right off that box.
Wow.
I think that's pretty powerful as well. So it's a nice little layout there. Now the wireless side of it.
I have a slide for the wireless portion because I want people to understand how it works with our cameras in particular. So first of all, like Nick mentioned, we've got Wi-Fi, we've got direct recording, we've got tally light, super fast setup, Ethernet, and production freedom. And in a perfect world, this is the setup for a camera that's not pan tilt zoom, right? And why don't we talk a little bit about wireless and how this could work properly with Multicast, Nick, and then we'll talk about how it could work with PTZOptics cameras.
Totally. So, I mean, with wireless, whenever you're doing wireless video, that's always the scary thing because the question isn't what's, the NewTek transmitter there, the Spark itself, but it's what's in between the Spark and the NDI receiver. And what WAP are you using? And when I say WAP, it's wireless access point. So which are you using something cheap off the shelf? Are you using something enterprise level? So that's really important to determine if you're building an infrastructure where you want to be wireless, having a good quality wireless access point that Spark is connecting to. Because at some point, it doesn't go wireless all the way to the laptop. At some point, it does get put into the standard network, the Ethernet network, and becomes just another NDI signal. So the scary, everything is, you've got the weakest link in any chain, right, is going to be the WAP in this case. And so we want to make sure you're using a good quality WAP. We also want to make sure that WAP can support things like streaming video and multiple devices. Because if we start to flood some of these really inexpensive, cheap, off-the-shelf consumer WAPs with multiple NDI signals, you might crush them. And we've had instances with other manufacturers that do wireless video transmission, not in NDI protocols, but similar streaming protocols, where you put one of them on the network, no problem. You put two on the network, probably not a problem. The third one crushes the network, and now you have a problem. So when we're building this kind of opportunity up, or this kind of system up, we want to make sure that the WAP is a good, solid WAP, and that you test it and burn it in and make sure it can support not just one device, but maybe multiple devices.
Yes, and we're hoping that this is going to be multicast enabled. There are some multicast enabled WAPs out there. In fact, we have one in here in our office.
Nice.
We actually use Ubiquiti. And Ubiquiti, they're about $100 each. They are multicast enabled, and I believe, I don't know how many gigabits you can get off them, but you're going to need a nice quality WAP, and that was just one of the things we wanted to mention. The other thing I wanted to mention is, here it is with the PTZOptics camera. So what we want to remember is that the Kinect Spark is not going to pass control or power to the PTZOptics camera. So think about that. You're still going to need to run Ethernet cable for PoE and for control of your PTZOptics camera. You can plug in HDMI or HD-SDI into the Spark, and that will transmit your video. But we're still going to recommend, and I think this would be, pretty much everyone would recommend plugging that in directly to the Ethernet if it's possible, because you're already running an Ethernet cable for power and control for your PTZOptics. Run two, and now you can have a direct hard line for your Kinect Spark and a direct hard line for your PTZOptics. And I think that's going to be your best scenario for using this.
Yeah, it almost seems like you almost just want to buy the PTZ camera that has it built in, so you just can go back to the one cable function. I mean, but if you've got an existing camera and you want to upgrade it and you don't have the funds to swap to a new camera, this is a great opportunity to engage that camera. And I think it's going to open up the opportunity to add more inputs to what your existing production. And it's not just cameras. I mean, it might be a laptop or a play-out device. I mean, there's all kinds of other items that we can start to put into the mix here, that suddenly this broadens out the scope of what production means for you as a particular client.
So I want to jump into the Q&A. So I'm going to really skim through this next spot. But here's an example of the Kinect Spark in a gaming environment, in a conferencing environment. Here's the traditional SDI workflow for large facilities where they've got a baseband router and vision mixers, and now we're simplifying everything over IP. I'm going to just whiz through this because I want to get to the Q&A. I know there's a lot of questions out there, right, Tess?
Yeah, there's some good questions coming up.
So here's video production software that switches it. There's a ton of NDI tools. We've got a free course on all of this that digs into NDI transmit, ISO Quarter, Video Monitor, Telestrator, the Adobe Creative Cloud plugin. There's even other third-party platforms. NewTek Transmit allows you to take any NDI source and make it available as a USB device for web conferencing. Here's an example of it being used with GoToMeeting, Skype, WebEx, video. The ISO Quarter app allows you to actually record any camera on your network that's NDI capable. The free one is 2 channels. The pro one is 16. There's Video Monitor, which is a perfect pair with our IP joystick, the PT Joy. So you can have a monitor of what you're looking at and have a joystick right over the network. The Telestrator allows you to, draw on top of things on any NDI source. Great for sports. Adobe Creative Cloud plugin, the Pizzazz, and I want to definitely get to the Q&A now. So let's jump into that, and yeah. All right, so let's jump into that. Nick, sorry, I have you muted.
Okay,
there you go.
So first I want to say that we have 1 of 3 winners. Mark Baker claimed his prize, so we do need to redraw, I believe, for the other 2 winners. In the meantime, MKB Webinars says, I wonder, is it possible to use NDI over a power line? Because in that case, you can use the camera power also for sending NDI signal to your switch.
Powerline converters are an interesting monkey. So I would say, you need to look at that particular converter and determine that it's got the bandwidth, because not all Powerline converters are built equally. And what I see usually, the top end bandwidth on those are about 270 megs. So they're not a giggy port effectively in the amount of data they can transfer. They also can inherently add noise to the signal because they're going across power, and if your power is not clean, you can create other problems along that side. So I won't say you can't do it. What I would say is test it, burn it in, make sure you like the experience, and then put it on Facebook so the rest of us can see that you pulled it off, because that's a great idea.
Kenny Hampton is asking about IP control over the network. He says, still confused with the IP joystick. Can you control the PTZOptics camera over the network, wireless or wired?
Well, the IP Joy and the camera themselves will be connected to the Ethernet, but as we explained a little bit in this presentation, there can be wireless access points in between potentially. But yeah, I mean those two devices are hardwired Ethernet devices. So the camera's hardwired to Ethernet. Ethernet port right on the back that's plugged in, and the joystick, but it all can be over these large local area networks that we were talking about.
Yeah, and that's, Paul, that's a great point to bring up, is you talked about, there could be multiple devices and multiple network hops, and it might possibly go through a WAP at some point too. I mean, some of these buildings are large campuses, are spread out. It's good to test these things and to look at what the latency is. Because when the more network drops you have, or the more switches it cascades through, the more latency you're inherently adding into the system. So it's always a good thing to test.
Right. Ted had a question come in a little bit ago, but he's comparing Cat 5 rather than Cat 6. Why not the higher rated cable?
I would definitely suggest Cat 6. Cat 5 is a little bit less expensive, and it's still going to give you a gigabit Ethernet, connection. The main difference is, I believe, the shielding. Would you say, Nick? Or
yeah, it's a shielding in the thickness of the wire as well inside. So the longer the distance is, I would recommend the Cat 6. Small inter-rack wiring things, Cat 5 is fine. When you start moving into the 10 gig, the 5 gigs, and some of the newer protocols coming up, you're going to want to stick to Cat 6. And you will not find a lot of Cat 7. You'll find Cat 7 in a lot of the 10 gig environments when it comes to 10 gig over copper rather than fiber.
Yeah, and let's just quickly, while we're on that subject, I wanted to ask you a little bit about multicast. It's going to become very important with NDI 3.0, which I think we're going to be grilling, Andrew on next week. But multicast is the ability to basically take up one channel of bandwidth, but have it opened up in multiple systems. I think Nick's going to give us something cool here. Nick, I think we lost your audio.
There's
yeah. I muted myself for the feedback.
Yeah, I got nervous.
So let's talk about multicast for a minute. That's really important. JT, do we have one of the DAs? Oh, hold on. I've got a DA here that will explain what multicast is. Or we can even just use the switch. So multicast is utilizing this as your DA. So the network switch itself says that when I pump video into the switch, that if I want to have 5 people viewing that video or 5 destinations pulling that video downstream, that the network switch is actually going to duplicate the signal to only the destinations that are asking to receive it, versus unicast, which floods the network to every port regardless of whether you want it or not. So it can create sort of bandwidth conflicts on the network. So what we're doing effectively is saying, okay, well, if you have the right switch, and that switch supports QoS and MPEG or layer 3 technologies, then this switch will intelligently say, well, I'm only going to send the video to the person who requests it, therefore preserving the amount of data flooding across the network. But it also acts as a DA. And if we think of DA as a distribution app, that means I have one source coming in and I need to carbon copy it to however many sources I need. Typically, you would buy an SDI DA. Those can be a couple $100s, and you're limited in the number of ports, right? I buy a 4-port AJA or Blackmagic. I get 4 ports downstream, so I can only feed 4 monitors, playout devices, whatever it may be. Well, your network's huge, so suddenly you have a gigantic DA for all that signal. So that means I can have multiple NDI monitors, multiple recording locations, sucking those NDI streams in and recording those to disk, and now you've got a whole massive matrix type facility, again, built into this device right here.
Wow. A lot of questions, Tess?
Yes, MKB Webinar says, I've been using the IP joystick for camera controlling 2 cameras on sports broadcasting. It works fine, but just because of the latency on the video over IP on its way back, it was not possible to control the cameras accurately. With NDI, will that problem be solved?
That is a great question. Now, first of all, NDI is going to be its own control protocol, which is interesting. So it will actually be able to control PTZ cameras. So it may become the preferred method in the future because NDI is going to be extremely low latency. I don't know if you could speak to the latency on NDI a little bit, Nick.
It's not one that I would want. Yeah, no, I won't. It's all over the map because it has to do with the source, the destination, the network. There's so many variables with latency. It is frames, and in some instances down to lines. So when we talking about what latency actually is, it's not one that I would comment because it has to do with what's your network like, what's your source device, what's your destination device, and that's all those are parameters that go into how much latency you're going to see.
Now, I do have a tip for MKB, which is, so our IP joysticks use a protocol called ONVIF. And just like NDI, where NDI has a bunch of tools, and you have a video monitor, an NDI video monitor, there is a ONVIF video monitor. And if you're using the ONVIF video monitor and the IP joystick, which is using ONVIF, those should match up better than like a direct SDI signal, which is going to have less latency than anything over your network, except for NDI. NDI should be at the same or better than HDMI and SDI, which is why everyone's so excited about it. And even our RTSP streaming has gotten a lot better latency-wise, but I think you're seeing maybe a half a second of latency over the IP joystick's control, and if you match up ONVIF with ONVIF, it should be a little bit smoother of a joystick operation workflow for you.
Yeah, and Paul, the official line is between 16 and 8 lines of latency, depending on the source device and the network. So it might be as low as 8 scan lines, which is really low. I mean, most people wouldn't recognize a scan line, let alone know what it is. I mean, that's less than a frame, effectively, of video. But it could go as high as 16, again, depending on, is this a computer source? Is this a camera source? It's all over the map based on the network and other pieces.
So do you have another question that you want to ask?
Yeah, Ted says, for use with portable systems where you're rolling up and unrolling Ethernet cables, what should users be looking for? Any specific manufacturers, cable model numbers?
That's a good question. So look, who is that?
This is Ted Langdell.
Ted
a new
Langdell.
name for me. He's watching on Facebook.
Hey, Ted.
Ted is thinking forward here. Forward thinking from you, Ted. He's actually thinking about rolling out a network switch in a portable scenario. And from what the guys I've talked to, they say, the portable guys are never going to switch to IP and network. They're going to do SDI, they're going to do RS-232, and that was me like 2 weeks ago. But then I realized, automating IP controls and workflows, and then I thought about it, and I could have had my wireless iPad, we could have had a Wi-Fi WAP. Yeah. And I should have done it now that I look back. So I'm with you. And how would you like to answer that one, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to the cable, right? So buy a good cable. Look, cable rollers are a dime a dozen. They're out there. They exist on the market. That's not the problem. It's getting the right cable. And there's different types of jackets on the actual cable itself, and there's different quality in the connectors. So if you're a professional who does, is going to roll out cables on a regular basis, I would look at there's a NewTek makes a connector that looks like an XLR, but it's got an Ethernet cable connector on the inside. So you get a nice hard shell exterior that's designed to be unhooked and hooked in to a chassis or a block or a cart on a regular basis, so that you're protecting that connector on the end from breaking. Because we all know if that little tab breaks off, you've got nothing to hold the cable in. So if somebody trips over your cable, well, then your cable's going to come out and you lost your camera signal. And the whole benefit to BNCs, which was the traditional SDIs over the years, is that you had that locking connector that locks that SDI signal in, and nobody's going to pull it out like an HDMI or an old S video cable. So look for a good quality cable with a rubber jacket so that it can can be flexible, can be rolled up, can be unrolled, can be twisted, and then look for a good hard connector like the NewTek ones so that it's got a solid kind of chunk when it goes into place and it's not going to be kicked or broken.
Great. One more quick thing before you move on, Paul. Michael Reynard is curious about the price of the 4 different cameras. Is there a price increase? What's the price difference?
So the price increase from a normal PTZOptics without NDI to NDI is $600. Okay. So it's $21.99 is the map for NDI cameras from PTZOptics. Now, if you have a Gen 2 camera,
Gen 2 SDI.
SDI camera, we're doing a special promotion. It's going to be $300 until we start shipping. Yes. $300 upgrade, special promotion until we start shipping the NDI models. So
for the next couple months.
Yeah,
probably.
we need to do, it's going to be basically our job to get the word out.
This.
Yeah, I haven't even told Tess yet.
Hey, my team, if you're on the phone, you better start making phone calls right now.
It's going to be, we're opening it up. We haven't even really, a lot of this stuff is so brand new, but
you don't have to send your cameras in. It's going to be a firmware update. Pay that $300 upgrade.
Paul, let's clarify, that's just going to be the SDI, not the HDMI only?
Yeah, just the SDI models. The USB models we're building this for the SDI models. So the NDI models are essentially the old SDI models with NDI built into the chips. It's what's inside that matters.
Paul with his nonverbal communication. It's what's inside.
So you want to keep going? I have a question for Nick.
Go ahead.
So Nick, my question for you is, all right, so a lot of corporate networks are not built for multicast, and they're not planning to build for multicast. But from what I understand, some of these higher end switchers, network switches, they allow you to have a VLAN where you can segment off a portion of your network and enable that portion of network to be multicast. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, as long as most switches support it now. At least not your cheap off-the-shelf switches you're going to find at your local Fry's. You're going to find it in most of your enterprise level or big corporate switches. So, but most network admins don't turn it on because one, they don't want video on their network. So the number one thing you can do to save yourself is to call your IT guy now and say, here's what we're planning. Work with me on this. Because most IT guys are afraid of video on their network because it's going to crush their network, it's going to flood their traffic, it's going to make their lives miserable. So, and I would say in our consulting, 90% of the time we end up with the IT guy at some point, sitting down with him saying, okay, let's work on this together. Let's VLAN this. Let's, build out a protocol for putting video on the network. So call your IT guy now and start the conversation, and start working with him to help you build out a subnet or a VLAN that allows you to manage video independently.
By the way, I just realized the Facebook chat room was it was on and connected and set up, but I didn't have the auto next going.
Nobody called us out on that. I'm surprised.
No one called us out on that, but now the Facebook comments and the YouTube comments are showing up, and we're using Chat Connect Pro to do that, which is free with all PTZOptics cameras, and we're using vMix data sources to pull all that in. So, questions?
Will power over IP also work after the upgrade?
PoE is already part of all PTZOptics SDI models that are Gen 2, regardless of whether it's NDI or not. So that's not a feature that's being added. That's a feature that's is included in both. So
that should cover us.
That covers that. That covers us. Great. So, Nick, we talked about, that was just a couple of the small things I thought, I think it's definitely a learning process for a lot of us. A lot of us are really, because a lot of people are just getting into streaming. Mm-hmm. And, if you call B&H and you ask them, hey, how should I set this up? They're going to say, buy an 8-input switcher, buy a TriCaster Mini, run SDI to all these cables. And I don't think they've been trained, or it's going to take them years to figure out how to set up these IP networks. So I feel like we're definitely on the bleeding edge, And we're trying our best to make it so that it's in layman's terms, because I feel like a lot of this is super new. Like, we just streamed an event 2 weeks ago. We used SDI and we used RS-232 because that's what we knew. And I still haven't really done a full all NDI production yet. Have you?
No. Well, everything we've done has been hybrid. It's been, mostly direct cable with a couple add-ons, a couple extra sources here or there. So it's not yet. I'm looking forward to it. We're building out this facility here so that it can be a hybrid with a couple local sources and the rest NDI. And thank you for the upgrade to the existing cameras so that we can make that hybrid system. But I think there's a few clients we know about that are doing it. But I would say, even if you look at, we had a great panel discussion at NAB a couple months ago, and the ones who are at the bleeding edge are hybrid as well. I don't think anybody's ready to do a complete cutover yet because they have existing infrastructures. They've been doing it for some time. So unless you're building from the ground up, you'll probably always be a hybrid.
Yeah. Now, I will say that, I don't know if you've seen our PTZOptics producer kits, but it's essentially an Intel NUC Skull Canyon, an i7 with 32 gigs of RAM, solid state hard drive, the latest i7 processor, and it comes with 2 frame grabbers. Well, now that we have the NDI cameras, essentially there's going to be a package with a PoE switch, and it is going to be significantly less expensive. There's SDI cabling, there's RS-232 cabling in the kits today. And I don't know if those kits will go away because I think some people are still going to be more comfortable with that. But there's going to be like a professional level with we're going to take a switch and I guess basically optimize it for video, PoE, and it's going to be easier to set up. 1 cable to each camera. Boom, boom, done. Switch in the middle, and probably a gigabit. Maybe a 5 gigabit, probably a gigabit switch for, these are these small little portable systems. You don't need a heck of a lot of data. And it's going to be less expensive, but it's going to be a little bit more. And what I have to say is NDI makes it easy. So it should actually be easier and less expensive.
Well, here's what I would say. What makes it easier is the NDI signal, when it hits the network, announces itself and says, hey, world, here am I. Right? So you don't have to go in and then search for it. You just, whatever your receiving device is, be it your switcher or your recorder or whatever it is, you just go to a pull down menu or a feed and say, show me what NDI signals are available to me. I can't say that about most of the other IP protocols on the market because most of them require you to understand what's the IP address from the device? Am I on the same subnet mask, right? I have to go in and manually configure to find that device or know that device exists and then punch in the correct IP address. What we have now with NDI is, dude, all I got to do is plug the camera into the switch and it's ready to go, right? No configurations from the heavy level of trying to understand all this networking protocol. I just plug it in and it goes. So those kits, yeah, killer, because the NDI makes it easy.
Yeah, that I have to agree with, and that's what does make them stand above and beyond some of the other protocols. Is it just not only works, but it's built into your favorite software that you already have. Millions of people using it already. It looks like there's a good question in there, Tess.
Last one with Gary.
On YouTube, is there one? I see text, but it's too small for me to read.
Gary just said, I did some research and NDI isn't that difficult to understand. I'm guessing NDI needs to be licensed to work with other cameras if they want to include it in their firmware too.
Yes.
We're lucky enough to be part of that.
We've been working with NewTek for a long time, and it's a serious commitment with engineering and development and back and forth. And one of the things I will say is that we're very lucky and dedicated to working with NewTek. We're having the CTO, Andrew Cross, on the show next Friday, and he's going to probably talk about some of the challenges that we've overcome in the industry together to bring something like this to market. And I think I give them so much credit because it's not like they could have probably had the only NDI camera. But they decided, no, we want to release with partners like Panasonic and PTZOptics and show that this is an open platform for development. And I think that's going to just proves to me and hopefully the rest of the industry that this is a company that's looking to grow, not just I think Andrew is not just out there to make money. I think he has a heart, and I think he's trying to spread this.
Spread the love.
The love. He's trying to spread the love.
Yeah, well, it's always been the core competency of what they do, right? They're bringing production down to a level that anybody can do. They're making the tool set easy to use and accessible, and there you go. And so NDI just exemplifies that, right? And it's video for the masses. And if you follow the sort of the broadcast standards of SMPTE 2022 and you realize how expensive it is, how hard it is to implement from a network standpoint, and then you've got something like NDI, which you just turn it on and plug it in, and you're like, whoa, I'm doing business now. That's great. So I'm excited for you guys to have them on. I look forward to watching that one. It's going to be a blast.
Well, thanks so much for being here. We kind of skipped out on, oops, that's not what I wanted to do.
We got to finish the giveaway, too.
We got to finish the giveaway.
And one question did just sneak in right here that you might want to address.
Sure.
5 to 6 NDI sources will overload a gigabit network on a software switcher, vMix or Wirecast, for example. What's the solution for that problem?
Did you get that, Nick?
5 to 6
Yeah, I was just
NDI
reading
sources.
that one. And there's another question on the Facebook side I want to answer as well. So, I would look at the sort of every link in the chain. What's the computer that you're using to switch with? Is it getting good bandwidth? Make sure you're not doing it wirelessly. You are wired to the network. And then, long term is that computer capable of pulling that many simultaneous streams coming in? There's a lot of angles and variables to it, but look at the network, look at how the data is coming into the computer that's doing the switch, and then if you can upgrade to a faster connection for that computer, and that might help the problem a little.
Yeah, because I guess most computers have a gigabit NIC, right? Now, one of the things I want to throw out there while we're talking about this is that some of the higher end computers that are really built to do this kind of live streaming and video production, they have a second NIC card. And from what I understand is that one of the best ways to set up an NDI system is to have a 5 gigabit or a 10 gigabit switch completely island off by itself. And have that secondary NIC just running to that secondary switch, and then your other NIC card is the one that goes out to the internet. So that whole gigabit connection is open for you. So yeah, I guess if you have a gigabit connection to your computer, you can only probably pull in 10 sources at a time.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that many, just due to network constraints. That you're gonna limit yourself to maybe sub 10. But remember, also the NDI protocol is one that it allows the bandwidth to change whether or not it's on air. So when the stream first hits your computer, you're watching a lower res preview of that stream until you take it to preview or to air, and then the bandwidth opens up to give you the full range, full motion video. So, but I think you've got a great point, and we've done this on the networking side for a lot of the recording, NDI recording machines, where we're recording 6-8 streams at a time, to add a second NIC port so that we can segregate some of the feeds across the different NIC ports and ensure that we're getting a maximum bandwidth across that machine.
Whose question was that?
That was Martin Stuckey.
Martin Stuckey. So yeah, and Martin, the one thing that I know vMix has in there is that if you bring in an NDI source, I think he mentioned he was using vMix. If you bring in an NDI source, you can hot swap that NDI source by right-clicking and switching. So if you don't have that many sources you need at any given one time, you can just bring in 1 or 2 sources and then right-click and switch them. And so it's only attaching to one at a time. And I think NDI 3, that's a question I want to bring to Andrew next week, because I think there's some new updates for bandwidth and low bandwidth, like lower definition feeds and higher definition feeds, depending on how you're using them.
Yeah, let me add to that. So Martin made a comment on his follow-up that he's using a notebook. One, I would look at the notebook. Does it have the horsepower? Because if you look at NewTek specs, they're, for most of these, they're recommending a minimum of an i7, or at least using an i7 to handle a certain number of streams. So look at the horsepower of your computer too, to ensure that it can, handle that number of streams. And yes, you can add a 10 gig port to a notebook by using like a Thunderlink adapter, or there's plenty of adapters that give you either over USB 3 or Thunderbolt to add 10 gig to a netbook. Yeah, we see it in the editorial world where the editors are on a MacBook, but they want 10 gig connection or fiber connection back to the SAN. So it's very easy to do. Not cheap by any measure, but it is plausible. call one of my guys and we can show you what what a Thunderlink adapter looks like and how it fits into the workflow.
Wow.
But that's a great one. And then there was a comment on the Facebook side about simulcast versus multicast, and I wanted to attack that for a second because we're missing one angle of that, which is unicast. So there's unicast, simulcast, multicast. So let's separate simulcast for a minute. That's what we're doing right now between YouTube and Facebook, which is one software layer creating two different versions of the video that meets two different CDN's requirements. And we're simulcasting out. And if we were going to satellite and to TV and to other locations, that would all be part of the simulcast. Multicast is something that's done in network on the LAN. So we're just using our network switch to multicast. Unicast is a point-to-point, right? I'm making a single webcast from my transmit device to my receive device. And, and that all these things go to how much bandwidth is going to be used on your network. Because if you unicast and you have 5 devices receiving that unicast, that's going to be 5 times the bandwidth on your network, whereas multicast won't do that to your network. And that's why with NDI 3, multicast is one of the most powerful things they're doing here, because it's going to allow them to better affect control of video on the network and not saturate the network too much.
Yeah, that's amazing. The one way I always think about it is like if you're watching television, there's a million channels available to you, and those are all simulcast. When you start on demand and you pay for a movie, they send an extra unicast to you, and it takes a minute to load, and then it locks in, right? Does that make sense? So you have all these television channels. They're all multicasting to you. You've got 900 channels that you can there's no load. You just go right through them all. That's all multicasting. And then when you go to on demand and you pick a movie, you're opening up a new unicast stream because they're not streaming all of those thousands of optional movies. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we got a ton of great questions. I knew there was going to be a lot of questions on this show. I hope that everyone's watches this show on demand throughout the next week. Just remember, if you're watching this, Andrew's going to be on the show next Friday, and I'm hoping that a lot of us are going to bring the heat, the fire.
Nick, it was great to have you on today.
Thank you for being on, Nick.
Thank you very much for having me. And apologies to the audience on the delay of audio. We seem to be having some network issues up here.
No problem. Well, thanks for joining. Thank you, everybody.
Don't forget to join the Facebook user group. I'll slide it in one more time. Facebook.com/group/PTZOptics pals. Thanks so much, guys.
And that's all, folks. We appreciate your participation in the chat room and can't wait to host our next informative Q&A session. Your questions drive the conversation forward for live streaming professionals around the world. Until next time, happy streaming!
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. That was a lot of fun.